Hello lovely people, and welcome to the clock striking 9. Welcome to this week's Coverlet of Comfort video. Before I start, if you didn't watch on Monday, I just want to say that my hands are not dirty. They're stained because I've been eco-printing. Clean them as best I can, but I hope it's not a disturbing sight for any of you. But like I said, they're perfectly clean. It will wear off over the next couple of days. So this week's stitching, I have been inspired by a few people in the private Facebook group, or a couple of people I think, who have stitched DNA onto their coverlet. So they've stitched, you know, the double helix of DNA. If you don't know how that looks, if you Google DNA double helix, you'll see it. But basically it's a wavy line. Let me draw it for you. I've got something to draw on. Talk amongst yourselves, totally unprepared for drawing. A scrap of paper. So it's drawn as one line going like this. That's probably not very well done. And then the other line goes like, does it go like that? Yes, like that. And then there are often connections put across like that. And some people have stitched that quite literally just with stitching. And it looks very beautiful. I have to finish now, of course. Do you see it? It's got a kind of 3D, like you've twisted a ribbon kind of effect. In fact, that's made me think of, we could also twist a ribbon. But then when you stitch it flat, it will just, yeah, no, that won't work. Forget that. So inspired by that, rather than stitching that literally, I thought of taking my inspiration from this stitch that we did if you made this journal with me, and I think I did a separate tutorial on it. My big journal's coming in, don't be scared. This stitch here, this interlaced running stitch, which I've only ever done before in straight lines. So basically you stitch a number of parallel stitching lines, staggering the stitch and the space in each line, and then you interlace a thread through them in a certain way. And I thought we could do a variation of that, or we can try it. I'll try it. If it looks rubbish, you don't have to do it. I'm here only to test things out for you. No, I'm not only here for that, I hope. So I've made a start, and I've chosen some thicker thread than I used on my background stitching, because I want to be able to see it, obviously. But at the same time, I don't want it to be too shouty, because I want the colours that I weave with to be the dominant thing, if that makes sense. So I've chosen, this is an 8-weight Valdani pearl cotton. I only used embroidery floss in the background, so it's a bit thicker, and it's slightly darker. I don't know if you can see it, I hope you can see it well enough, that it shows up, but it's not too much in your face. So all I did to start with, because I thought this is going to take me quite some time, is I stitched one line. I got up here where I haven't done anything more. I stitched one line of running stitch, and I paid a little bit of attention to make sure that my stitch and my space was roughly the same length and that they were medium size. So I guess my stitch and my space are somewhere around 1/4 inch, maybe a bit less. And I made my line just undulate, isn't that a great word, but just gently, no big dips and troughs, because otherwise you'll have trouble when you come along to do what I'm now doing. So that I'm going to do 3 lines. So this is my centre line, so that I need to stitch a line either side of it, and in the lines either side I need to put the stitch where the space is in the centre line and the space where the stitch is, so they're offset. Now because we're on a curve, some of the distances will vary, so you will need to modify your stitch and space length a bit as you go, but don't get too stressed over it. As long as they're vaguely staggered, it should be fine. Should. So you see here I'm coming around a concave bend curve, and so here's my space where my stitch is going to be, but I'm already halfway this stitch, so I'm just going to make this stitch a bit bigger. I'm keeping my gap between the 2 lines a good 1/4 inch apart. So I'm just going to make this stitch a bit bigger and this space a bit bigger, just to get around that curve. And then I'm going to carry on into this downward slope, so to speak, just doing the same thing, just making sure I'm vaguely staggering them. And this is why I said I think I did some of my curves a bit too curvy. I think it would be better to have it just a gently waving line. But we'll see how it looks, and we'll hope for the best. And if it doesn't, you know, if in some parts it looks a bit dodgy, then I shall just stitch something else over it later. It's the joy of working this slow stitch way. So here I'm going into a sort of inner curve, so my stitches need and my spaces need to go slightly smaller. So I hope that makes sense. So I'll just stitch on. Yeah, and I had already thought of including DNA in some way, because that is literally the thread that connects all life. And seeing the way that these couple of people, they'd done it slightly differently, each of them, but it was very recognisable as DNA. And I was very inspired by that, so thank you if that was you. I'm sorry I don't remember your names. We've got, I think, nearly 5,000 people in the private Facebook group now, and it's a very thriving, lovely, joyful, welcoming community. So do consider joining us if you've a mind. The link is always below every video, but it's called Slowstitch with Kathryn. And you'll be made very welcome. So I'm just coming round again. I'm coming round an outward curve, a concave curve. I'm just going to make everything a bit bigger. On this way of stitching, when I do the parallel lines, you know, just the normal background stitching that I did, I mentioned, I think, that I do like to pay attention to the stitch and the space as I work, because for me it's kind of part of the mindful process. Right, I'm just going to shoot through to the back here and turn the whole thing around. So now I need to work the other side of my centre line, and again so here's the first stitch, here's the first space, so I need my first stitch in this outer line to be opposite the first space. I hope I've made that clear. So yeah, so I'm just going to stitch back the other way in the same way, just keeping an eye on the distance and the spacing. Yeah, because it's not mindless stitching, is it? It's mindful stitching. And so having these little things, but hopefully not stressful things, you know, it's not like we're doing super precise embroidery or anything where everything's got to be perfect and neat and all that. But we've just got these little things that we have to pay attention to that engages, well, for me at least, you'll have to let me know if you're the same, engages me in the work, but in a way that's not remotely stressful. And I hope that none of you get stressed about things either. Or if you're new to this, maybe you do feel a little bit stressed in the beginning. But there's no right or wrong way. Well, I guess if there's a wrong way, then it's being stressed. Because this is about enjoyment and pleasure in the creative process. I mentioned last week the book Women's Work, the First 20,000 Years by Elizabeth Wayland Barber, and somebody messaged me on Ko-fi. I think it was Miriam. Was it you, Miriam? Apologies if I've remembered the wrong name. That there's a Haptic and Hue podcast. Now, Haptic and Hue, she does wonderful podcasts about textiles, and you don't have to listen to them on YouTube, I don't think. You can go to her website, which I will try and remember to link, although I'm doing this Wednesday morning, 9 o'clock. You just heard the clock chime, and I've got quite a lot of stuff to do today, which is why I'm starting early. Anyway, I'll try. I'm making excuses in advance in case I forget to put the link, but it's Haptic and Hue. I will put it on the screen at least now. So if you look down, look back up, it's on the screen. And she had an interview with Elizabeth Wayland Barber, the author of Women's Work, the First 20,000 Years. And it was absolutely fascinating to listen to the story of how she came to write that book, and actually her own life. Because I talked about the invention of the needle, I think, last week. Was that last week? I hope I'm not having an out-of-video experience and it was in a different video. And if it was, I hope you saw it and you know what I'm talking about. The that yeah, the invention of the needle and what it meant to humankind to enable us to make garments. And you know, and I think that's when I suggested that book. It's, although she is a scientist, well, she's retired now, I think she's in her 80s, it's very accessible, but the research that went into it is absolutely phenomenal. She travelled all over Europe, going into all kinds of museums and libraries to you know, to research, because there wasn't really anything in the literature specifically about prehistoric textiles until she came along. There were little mentions here and there, but it's mostly about, well, the phrase they use is stones and bones, you know, because things that survive, and also, dare I say, most archaeologists, certainly back in the day, were men, so it's from a male perspective. And because most textiles biodegrade, I say most because there have been finds, you know, that have been in certain environments that have survived. But anyway, so she came along and she had to look at all different kinds of evidence, you know, evidence in carvings and things like that. And things like finding bodies, finding grave sites, and for example with rows of beads along part of the body, just the beads but in a line, which obviously suggests that they have been threaded there, and you know, things like that. And then string skirts was her big thing. That was the first kind of made garment, because string was, she says that the Stone Age have been better called the age of string. I just love that. But anyway, I'm telling you the whole podcast. Go and listen to the podcast. It's about half an hour, 40 minutes, something like that. It's on the Haptic and Hue YouTube channel, and it's got Elizabeth Wayland Barber's name on it, but I will try and put the link. So thank you for telling me about that. That's lovely that I tell you things and you tell me things. Make sure I'm in the right place. But it's just, for those of us who love textiles, and I'm guessing that's all of us here, otherwise you wouldn't be here. See here, I've got a really big distance to make. I think I'm just going to have to do a really big stitch and a really big space, and we'll see how that works out. And I've got a really long thread as well, and a thread hair. It's all going on this morning. Yeah, for those of us who love textiles, thinking about our theme of ancestral lines this month, the ancestral lines of the things that we're working with, the needle, the cloth, the thread, all that, you know, the concept of creating cloth in the first place. And as I said, that almost certainly started with creating string, so twining. So when you make cloth twine, if you make cloth twine, you know, as per my video, or anybody else's video for that matter, you're doing the first textile technology that there ever was. And I just think that's one of the reasons why I just like to do it with my own two hands. And I know not everybody can because of hand issues, but it connects me with those women from, I think she said in this interview that although her book's 20,000 years, there's now evidence found much earlier than that of string, like 40,000 or even more, somewhere in France, I believe. But anyway, however long ago, it's a long time that it connects you with that ancestor, that woman, because she claims it's, you know, her book's called Women's Work, so it is largely women that were involved in the textile production. It's thought, as far as the evidence tells us, you know, it connects you with that person sitting twining bast fibres from nettles, as I was doing the other week. You know, that is, I feel a connection going right back through history. Stitch at the same time, Kathryn. Sorry. And that was what I wanted to try to convey to you. That even now that I'm stitching with a machine-made needle and finely produced thread and cloths and everything, if you look back through history, at the history of textile making and weaving and spinning, which is something that I really want to learn, and I'm going to in this autumn sometime. You know, the whole process, when it was done by human hands rather than industrially, those of us who engage with these processes, whether it be spinning, weaving, making strim, basket making, you know, that's all textiles, that's all fibre, stitching, knitting, crocheting, you know, all the things. It connects us going back to our ancestors. That's my feeling about it anyway. And I think that when I talk about slow stitch, I talk about cultural connections with the past, but I've never talked about that far back, I don't think. I've talked more about, you know, my own history of patchwork in the English style, English paper piecing, or crazy patchwork, or, you know, the log cabins, excuse me, that may have originated in America, or may have originated in the Isle of Man, or both of those places at the same time, or elsewhere. Doesn't really matter. Indian cantha, Japanese boro, all those things, they're all in relatively recent history, you know, in relation to potentially 40, 50,000 years ago. But it's that journey, that thread, that's a lovely metaphor, isn't it, considering the medium that we're working in. That thread that connects us all, going back to our own foremothers, you know, if our foremothers, our mothers, our grandmothers, whatever. I know my mother did a lot of dressmaking, my grandmother was a keen knitter, my Auntie Lily I've talked about. I'm now in the wrong place. I've come up where I shouldn't have, because I should have made a wider gap, so I'm just going to cheat and go back in nearly the same hole where my thread came out and move along a bit, rather than unthreading my needle. And it's popped through. Yeah, it's just all those connections. So I'm just going to stitch along here until I get to the end, and then I'm going to have a sip of my tea because it's early in the morning, as you heard the clock. Well, 9's not early, is it? But, you know, I haven't been up for very long. Well, as usual, I've been up twice. I was up again at 5. I can't blame Fred this morning. I was just up anyway because, you know, I needed to go for a wee. I'm sure many of you can relate. But then I made a cup of tea, I went back to bed and read my book a bit more. And I did go back to sleep again. So anyway, all that said, you don't really need to know all that. But anyway, I shall finish stitching this, drink my tea, and then I'll be back for the interlacing part. Okay, I have finished my 3 lines of running stitch. So I've got some dark red wool to represent the maternal line, and then I've got some dark blue wool to represent the paternal line. Dark blue because I didn't want it to be too shouty. My theme is mostly red, but it's there, you know, and this is the Eco Vita from DMC that I talked about last time. And this would have been dyed with indigo, I would imagine, because they're all naturally dyed threads. So I've got the red wool in a very thick needle just to take the wool to start with. And the advantage of this is you can use this thick stuff that's not very nice to sew with sometimes, because you only have to come up at the beginning and down at the end, and in between you're on the surface of the cloth. So I'm going to put a knot in one end and then come through. Yeah, I'm shoulding myself. Your last stitches on your 3 lines should be the outer ones. My last stitch is an inner one, which is now redundant really, because I need to come up at one of the outer ones, but that doesn't matter. But just, you know, to you, if that worries you. Do you see what I mean? So that stitch isn't necessary. So your outer stitches are the top and bottom ones. So I'm just going to come up just to the side of the top stitch, which is quite difficult, and I've pulled, what have I pulled through? I've pulled my tail through. But like I said, you've only got to do it once. Where's the tail? There we go. Alright, so now I'm anchored. So now I'm going to use the eye of my needle And I'm going to, do you see how if you can kind of visualize that they go, if you look across the line on the diagonal, there's 1, 2, 3 in a diagonal. So I'm going to go through on that diagonal and back on that diagonal. So every time I'll miss out an in-between stitch. So I'm going to go outside that first stitch and under it, and then under the middle stitch on the diagonal, and then the third stitch on the diagonal, and then pull through. Like so. See that? I'm not going to put it too tight, just make sure it lays nice and flat. So then I'm going to go along to the next stitch on the side that I'm on and go under it, and then go up on the opposite diagonal, so making a triangle shape. So through that, through the middle, and through the top. And I'm having to be a little bit careful of my background stitching, but it's not too troublesome so far. And pull that through. And I'm going to do that all the way along my wiggly line. So along to the next stitch, and then just have to check that yeah, that's right. So along to the next stitch, and then on the diagonal, so the middle stitch and the outer stitch. If it gets a bit confusing on the curves which is which stitch, if you look, you will see that in between there are 2 outer stitches and an inner stitch left unthreaded. Here we go again, 2 outer stitches and an inner stitch left unthreaded. So you can use that as your checking mechanism if necessary, if it looks a bit confusing. It's quite difficult not to get my arms in your way, but hopefully you've got the idea. So 1, 2, 3. Apparently I need to concentrate, so I might just go ahead and do this, and then I'll come back to you for the blue line. And I do want to talk a little bit about homework, because next week is the last Wednesday of August, and the week after we'll be into September. So I do want to talk a little bit about further things that I'm going to do. So I'll finish the red and I'll come back when I'm ready to do the blue. Okay, so I'll see you in no time at all for you. Okay, I've got to the other end. Talk about thread chicken, look at that. So I'm just going to go back down through the beginning of the stitch where I am, if that makes sense, the brown stitch. And straight to the back. I guess you could, if you wanted to, have started on that middle stitch on the end of it, and then you would have joined up your 2 chains at the end. Mine will be open. I thought about that as I was stitching along, but I don't think it matters because I think this end's going to get covered up anyway with the joining, so it's just a thought I had. So it's quite difficult to get that through, but that'll do. If it's difficult to get it through, it'll be difficult to pull out, so 1 back stitch will be enough, she said, hopefully. So I'm going to go back to the beginning, show you my wiggly red line. I thought as I was doing it, basically what we're doing is couching in reverse. So when you're couching, you lay the fibre on and stitch over it, and this way we've stitched and then threaded the fibre through it. But I think that's quite cool. I mean, you could even do it just, you know, for a single line as a change from couching. I guess you could also just go into your stitch background, oh, there's a thought, and thread through the stitches that are already there. Oh, perhaps I'll do some of that. Just thought of that. You know, not all of them, but just make it up as you go along to get a pleasing wiggle going on. But anyway, let's do the blue first and not get ahead of ourselves. Have I got the right end? Yes, I think so. So I'm going to get some of this on my big needle again. And basically all I'm going to do is go back the other way, through in the opposite direction. It's probably fairly obvious, if only I can thread my needle. There we go. It does twist a bit as well. I had to keep, because it's yarn and it's plied, I did have to keep twisting it back as it started to unply. Just depends on what fibre you're using. but just be aware of that, you know, as you're working. It's another one of those little things to pay attention to, isn't it? So I'll do a knot again, and then this time I'm going to come up and the opposite stitch, so the stitch on the end that's sitting there all on its own, and thread in the opposite direction to make my version of the double helix. So I've turned my needle round, so I go through there, and then I go through the red, and I'm going to go under the red and the stitch, and then into that one. Still stop. I think it's because it's gone a bit damp again, and she started, funnily enough, we're talking about fungus on Monday, if you watch Monday's journaling video. She has an allergy to a yeast on her skin. A yeast is a kind of fungus, and she has tablets, daily tablets against it. It's a yeast that's common in all dogs, but some dogs are allergic. And these dogs, she's got a cockapoo, so she's half poodle. She doesn't shed her coat. They're more prone to it because they don't shed their coat, as I understand it. Anyway, back to the stitching. So because it's gone damp, I guess the yeast is growing more and she's getting a bit more itchy, whereas when it was hot and dry she was much better. So I've come up that way, and now I'm going to just I'm doing the same thing as before in the opposite direction. So I go along to the next stitch in the line, and then under the centre stitch where the red is, and under the outer stitch. And there will now be a redundant stitch in the middle that I'm not using, but it was just easier to stitch it like that than try and guess where the redundant stitch was and leave a great big gap. That would have been, you know, more problematic, I think. So go along to the next stitch, under the middle one, and up. I think you can see already that it does look like the double helix. Quite pleased with that. Worked out as well as it did in my head, which is always a good thing. So I'm just going to go back the other way. Just being a bit careful to get under the red stitch as well, the red thread as well in that middle stitch. I've got a great long length of yarn. If you did run out somewhere along the way and need to get more yarn, all I would do is I would just go through to the back wherever I ran out. So say I ran out here, I would go through to the back just above that stitch where I'm coming out, finish off, start again with a new bit and come back up in exactly the same spot. Simple as that, so that you don't see the join. I'm really pleased that this has worked out. I thought of it a couple of days ago because I was thinking about how to stitch DNA, and I thought, oh, there's that interlaced stitch, that looks a bit like DNA. So I looked at the spine of my journal and I kind of thought, oh, that will work. And I thought, well, let me get a little piece of cloth and give it a, you know, practice. And then I thought, no, I won't. I thought, no, I'll do it. What is it, Stars? I know you've not had your walk yet. We'll go in a bit. She wants to go for her walk. Yes, we'll go in a bit when the video's uploading for the lovely people. You go down. There's a good girl. Yeah, and I thought, no, I'll just do it with you because I just think it's nice, you know. I think if it hadn't worked, it would have been interesting as well for you to see how it didn't work and what I might have done about it. I don't know. Rather than me going off and practicing and making sure it was right and only showing you the things that were right. So that was my thinking. That was my justifying my laziness. No, it's not lazy. But yeah, I'm very happy with it. It's come out even better than I imagined, actually, so that's nice. And the other thing is this stitching kind of has its roots, or part of its roots, in Indian Kantha stitching. So that's one of those connections again, because I've said many times that my two main influences, my two main cultural influences outside my own, are Indian Kantha and Japanese Borrow. That stitch is hiding a little bit there. It's just a bit soft and fluffy there, so I'm just, oh no, that's, sorry, no, it's not hiding, it's not, that's not the, where are we? I'm going the wrong way, I have to go up this way. Took a wrong turning, everybody. Never mind, we're back on track. That's why it was difficult. It made me stop and think because it was not going easy. So now there, there and there. You do just have to pay a little bit of attention when you're in these curves as to which is where, and just keep your eye on that little extra stitch in the middle of each chain, each link in the chain, and that kind of gives you a little way marker, if that makes sense. So while I'm finishing this, I can talk to you about what else I'm going to do. I think I am planning on doing more couching of things, just along that same theme of bloodlines, ancestral lines. So I showed you last week my basket of red stuff, which I'll show you again at the end in case you've forgotten or you weren't here last week. And if you weren't here last week, I hope you've got a note explaining your absence. I'm joking. Otherwise you'll have to stay behind and speak to me. Sorry. Weird sense of humour I've got sometimes. Yeah, because I want the cream strips and the stitching were just intended to be background. One of you said you watched Park Home Life on Friday that you were surprised to see that I'd already stitched it onto the rest of the coverlet. No, it was just pins there. I just pinned it up to keep, I'm keeping the coverlet pinned up there because I don't like it to be folded, because you can get fold lines if you have things folded, you know, for any length of time. And I haven't got anywhere to lay it out flat or hang it up anywhere else otherwise, really, so it's hanging there on the curtain, on the curtain pole. But no, it was just pinned, just to keep it, you know, keep it safe. I'm really enjoying doing this actually. So yeah, so I'm going to couch on some more red stuff, and next week I've got one more idea of something specific to do that I'll share with you, but I don't think we really need to worry about leaving space for it. It'll fit in somewhere, and when I do my couching I'm going to probably overlap things as well, but I'll show you next time. So, you know, you obviously are more than welcome to just do this stitching if you like it, and then leave the rest until you see what I've done next week, because you're not under the same tight schedule that I am, or tight schedule, you know. Or you can just go ahead and do your own thing. I know many of you do. You take the start and then you go ahead and do your own thing, and that's lovely, and that's absolutely fine, and that's where I've seen the DNA stitching. So you know, people that have had their own ideas, and often I'm inspired by other people as well and bring them here to share. It's kind of like we're one big community class. Now there you see it's starting to unply, so I'm just going to make sure I ply it back up. Just twist it, you know, back up. I'm trying to get into the jargon of, you know, the technical language of spinning and weaving, so I don't look completely daft when I go to lovely Tash. Hello Tash, in autumn, who's going to teach me. She's going to teach me how to spin and weave. I don't know if she's going to teach me it all in one day. Might have to be a couple of visits, but we'll see. She might have let herself in for more than she realised. But yeah, I'm very much looking forward to it. Sorry if my head's coming in. It was quite hard to see because my background stitches, like I said, are a bit blendy. Okay, well I'm going to finish doing this line and then I will come back and show you some of the stuff I'm thinking of couching on, and talk about it in a more sensible manner than just, you know, vaguely saying I'm going to couch some stuff on. Okay, so I'll be back in a moment. Okay, so that's all done. I'll just give you a slow scan. So even though some of my stitch gaps went quite big or small, I think on the whole it's pretty you know, it's a bit wonky here and there. You might have, if your coverlet's going to go on your bed or whatever, just look out if you get, like here's quite a long loop. So what you could do then, if you're couching something else and you're nearby with, you know, a red thread, just take a little stitch over that, just to couch that down a bit more. Just, you know, we could do things like that as you go. Anywhere on your piece if you're stitching away, and just pay attention and notice, and if you see something that you think is not quite right while you're there with a needle and thread, you can just do a little something. So that's my representation of DNA in interlaced running stitch, and yeah, like I said, it's lovely when things come out even better than you imagined in your head, because I'm looking at the spine of my journal and I was trying to visualise it without all the extra stitching that I wasn't going to do, you know, because that's 5 lines and everything interlocked. So there we go, DNA. Other stuff I've got in my little basket here, not that pouch, is some Appleton's vintage, oh I could have used that for my red, oh never mind, which I might couch on. I might try, like I said, just going through some of my background stitching with some red thread, just meandering about, just going through whichever stitch I think, you know, anywhere, wherever I fancy. And I might cross with things. So for example, if I went to couch some of this on, maybe I might come across my DNA with it, or I might even come across my embroidery. I just want it to be a really rich textured background of lines, which is why I'm going to do some homework. And I might as well do just some red stitching, but I think I'll leave just the red stitching because I think that's part of next week really. So this week I'm going to just do more couching. I'm not going to worry too much about how much gap I leave. I mean, I'm obviously not going to cover the whole thing, so I might couch some of that. I've got this lovely silk from Jill. I might couch some of that. I might match the colour, or I might use a contrasting colour. I've just got this thread off a bobbin because I needed the bobbin to wind some other thread on. Some kind of vintage, I think it's mending thread. I have a feeling it's nylon and wool because it's 2 different strands. Do you see that? I must do a burn test and see if that is nylon. But anyway, it's a nice colour and I would use it still, even though it's nylon, because it's thrifted and I'd rather I used it than it went into landfill. But I might, you know, I could couch with that as a contrast. That was the beginning of my sentence, as a contrasting thread, or I could couch with that as just you know, a more matching thread. And when you couch, I've shown you couching before, I'm pretty sure you remember or you know, you just stitch over, but you can also do other kinds of stitching, and so I think next week we might do some of that as well. So I'll do some couching, and next week we'll do more stitching and different ways of couching rather than just the stitching over it. Okay, so I've given you a heads up about next week. I think that's the first time I've done that. Friday's video, I just wanted to briefly talk about that. Friday's video is going to be about the moon project, which I referred to in last Friday's Park Home Life, and I've been stitching away on my moon squares. I'm not going to show you them now, I'm going to make you wait till Friday. And I want to show you how I'm doing that in case you want to do the moon project again, or do it at all because you didn't do it before, where we stitch the phase of the moon every day for 28 days. Anyway, I'll show you on Friday. So that's coming up on Friday. Friday will be a slow stitch video, basically, that you may or may not want to include in your coverlet of comfort. That will be up to you. It will be an extra on top of the monthly prompts. It's not in place of one of them. So I hope that's all okay. I hope you enjoy stitching your DNA, and thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to you joining me next time for more cloth tales. Lots of love. I'm going to take Stella for a walk. Bye bye. Kisses. Bye bye.